Hello and welcome to Tech 24 on France 24. I'm James Creedon. Coming up on this week's show, imagine watching a movie where you can change the ending by simply using your brainwaves. Well, it is now almost possible. A UK researcher has made a short film with many different outcomes. And a new probe that will touch the sun, well, at least its atmosphere. This Parker Solar Probe will be launched on the 4th of August. More on that later in the show. Thanks for watching. Now, it's a movie that you can control using your brainwaves. The Moment is a short film by a UK researcher. It can be directly manipulated by the brain signals of an audience member, making for a film with many different possible outcomes. Claire Rush has the details.
This student wears an EEG, or an electroencephalogram. It's a headset that monitors her brain signals as she watches The Moment, a short film by Richard Ranchern of Nottingham University. The EEG doesn't know what you're thinking, but it can sense your physiological reactions.
As a person watching a movie, you're creating a certain physiological data. Your skin sweats, your brain sends off signals that's directly related to your experience in the moment. And using that as an input to a film experience allows you to change that film, creating a two-way effect loop.
The sensor can also tell whether your attention span is increasing or decreasing. It's precisely this change in attention span that triggers a new scene. Effectively, the scene changes when the EEG headset thinks you may be getting bored, which means the film is always different, depending on who's wired up watching.
There's billions of different combinations of this film. It's 24 minutes long, and each scene splits off. There's like multiple variations of each scene, but also each second can be different. So each second there's a possible different version of the film.
Ranchern shows his film in a trailer on campus. Only one audience member at a time can wear the headset. This U.S. student questioned if she truly controlled the film.
The whole part where we couldn't hear anything, all the sound was distorted and all the faces were like holograms. I was really stressed during that part, and then I realized I was stressed, and when I tried to breathe, it kind of stopped a little bit. I'm not sure if that was a coincidence since the scene was ending or if it was because my brain controlled it.
The use of EEG headsets is the latest exciting innovation in the merging fields of gaming and film.
Now, for more on the field of interactive filmmaking, we're joined by Tobias Weber of Control Movie. Tobias, you were involved behind the recent interactive film Late Shift. Can you tell us briefly about that film and the techniques used to allow for viewer participation?
Oh, of course. Late Shift is a full feature-length movie which allows as well the audience to participate. That works in cinemas, where everyone has their own smartphone to make decisions collectively, and then the majority rules in which direction the main protagonist is supposed to go. And you can also watch that at home on your own or with friends or even on your mobile.
So the technique you used, the audience member is very much aware of his participation. It's sort of at the frontier of gaming and filmmaking. What do you make of this film, The Moment? Because you heard there some of the people in the audience weren't really sure if they had impacted on the film's outcome at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you basically change the film based on physical reactions, then it's not a conscious thing where you know exactly, okay, I took this decision, that's why this is happening now. So you're never quite aware of where it actually branched. And personally, creatively, I think it's more interesting if you have someone involved on a conscious level.
So what do you see down the line for interactive films in terms of new techniques that could take off? Clearly, with your project, you were using smartphone devices, and it's quite like gaming, right? Is that what you see more of, some sort of merging of video games, gaming and film?
Yeah, I certainly think that. I mean, we're on the crossroad where, like, a lot of media are blurring, the lines between media are blurring, and yeah, I mean, there are games that become more and more cinematic, and now cinema becomes a little bit more like a game. And I think people love to be involved. They love to be part of a movie. They love to make decisions for the protagonist. So that's basically what we're giving them.
Playing devil's advocate, don't you think there's still an important place, though, for just relaxed storytelling where you sit back and you listen to the storyteller instead of having a participatory role? I think with social media and all of that, perhaps there's more of a, what would you say, more of a space now for interaction in storytelling. But what about old-fashioned storytelling? Do you think that's still going to be there in the future?
100%. I definitely hope so. I think, those things will coexist, and there will be films where you actually have a say in it, and there will be others that you just watch. And, I mean, you can't probably make a historic piece or a biopic where you give total control to the audience. It just doesn't make sense. Or a documentary may not make sense. But in many other places, I think it does make sense because, you're, as a filmmaker, you're entering a dialogue with your audience. And I think this is really interesting because you're sort of like taking on their opinion, you're challenging their views, and that's a very interesting way of telling stories.
All right, Tobias Weber, very interesting. Thanks for talking to us on Tech24. Now, moving on, let's talk about the Parker Solar Probe, which will get closer to the sun than any probes of the past. Dhananjay Khatalkar has been looking into it. Dhananjay, why is this probe important?
Well, the reason why this probe is so important is because it is expected to reveal the mysteries of the sun's corona. The corona is essentially the outer atmosphere of the sun. And
so that's the part it's going to touch, not the actual flames, because it would burn up, right?
No, you'll be surprised.
All right.
Because the temperature in corona is much more than on the sun's surface. It's like you are getting away from fire.
I see.
And it becomes hotter and hotter. So that's the mystery that has confounded scientists for a long time.
It's one of the things they want to look into?
That's the main thing they want to look into, because corona is also the source of the so-called solar wind. Now, the solar wind, it affects all the bodies in our solar system, including our planet. And this solar wind, it essentially is a release of highly charged particles, and they interact with our planet's magnetic field, and that's how you get the phenomenon, the auroras you see in the northern hemisphere. There's brilliant lightings in the sky. So that's because of
So they're because of solar winds?
Absolutely. That's because of the interaction between these particles and the Earth's magnetic field. And also, it can also have some disturbances. It can create disturbances to, for example, to our communication networks if the solar winds are very powerful. So that's the reason why we should study corona. Now, this particular probe will get to within 6 million kilometers of the sun's surface. And now, just to give you an idea, it may seem a vast distance, but the distance between the Earth and the Sun is 150 million kilometers. So it's quite close when you compare the two.
Incredible.
Distances.
Tell us about the French involvement.
Well, first of all,
NASA.
Absolutely. The major piece of hardware that a French agency is contributing is in the form of a magnetometer, which will be on board this particular probe on a tether. So this magnetometer will be studying the changes in fluxes of, the fluctuation of the magnetic field. And the reason why they're doing it, because there's one theory that the reason why there's a difference between, there's a vast difference between the surface temperature of the sun and corona is because of this emission of this electromagnetic radiation. And so these electromagnetic radiations, they could contribute to the intense heat in the corona.
That's a particular French sort of angle on
That's one of the magnetometers. Yeah. There are 2 other magnetometers developed by NASA. Then there is an electron detection circuit, which has been developed by the Laboratoire de Physique des Plasmas, which is based in Paris. Then there's another, in fact, one of the most important things is done by the laboratory called PROMES in the Pyrenees region. Now, as you can imagine, as you approach the sun, there will be intense heat and radiation. So in order to protect these instruments, there's a massive heat shield that will be deployed on this particular probe, which is made of carbon composites, and it is coated with a special layer for reflecting the light. So that testing of these instruments, the heat testing, has been done in this lab.
And these are not manned missions. We can confirm that, right? No human life will be put at risk. OK. Thanks for that, Dan. Now it's time for Test 24. Dan and Jay Cadilcar, you've been taking a look at a device developed by the French company Fluigent that helps in quick and accurate detection of diseases by using microfluidics. Now, first of all, what is microfluidics?
Well, microfluidics is a technique that involves the manipulation of small amounts of liquid to the order of, say, microliters or even to femtoliters, which is 10 raised to minus 12 or 15, I'm not sure. It's very small.
Tiny amounts of liquid.
Yeah, tiny amounts of liquid.
Can you see it with the human eye?
No, you cannot.
Okay.
So these are very tiny amounts of liquid, and this is done by using capillaries or channels, like the ones you find here on this chip. So this essentially is a lab on a chip.
Everything's tiny. Tiny lab, tiny...
Absolutely. Now, the idea behind this is because you're processing very small amounts of liquids, it is easier to analyze them. So, for example, if you want to, I don't know, check some blood sample, it will be easier to do so, it will be quicker to do so, and it will be more accurate.
I see. And what added value does the Fluigent device bring to microfluidics?
Well, one of the conventional systems that is used in microfluidics is the use of a syringe pump. Right. So in order to pump the liquid, they use a mechanism which is composed of mechanical parts, and that's how they pump the liquid in onto this chip. Right. But the Fluigent, the Paris-based company, they patented this process. They got the patent about 12 years ago, and this was done at the Curie Institute, here again in Paris. Right. So instead of using the mechanical parts, what they're using is gas pressure. And this is the device, so I can control the pressure here. So the gas is, this pressure is generated by using a compressor, and as you can see, I can change the pressure and you'll see the changes here. Right. So what's happening here is there's some liquid on the chip located here. This is a microscope. Yes. And you can see there are some small droplets. Yes. So using the pressure, I can determine the size of each droplet, right from micro to femto, as I told you. And by doing this, I can channelize these droplets on different parts of this chip, and I can do multiple analysis. So instead of just having one blood sample for one disease, I can use the same blood sample and analyze different diseases at the same time. And it has many different applications.
All right. Well, in the field of medicine, hopefully we'll benefit from innovations such as this. Thanks for that, Dan and Jay. That brings us to the end of this edition of Tech 24. Thanks for watching.